Be part of the 1% by mastering your morning routine. Stoic mindset routine for mental strength. There is a moment, and you have lived it, where the night ends and the day has not yet begun. A breath, a stillness, a half-second where nothing has been demanded of you yet. And in that half-second, something inside you already knows. It already knows whether today will be another day you survive or a day you actually live. Most people never catch that moment. They let it slip between the alarm and the phone screen, between the snooze button and the first scroll. And that is not laziness. That is not weakness. That is something far more precise. It is the absence of a practice. This video is not about waking up at 5 in the morning. It is not about cold showers or journaling apps or a perfectly timed supplement stack. What separates the 1% is something quieter, something older, something tested not in boardrooms or productivity podcasts, but in plague, in war, in exile, in grief. By people who had every reason to collapse and chose, with full awareness of that reason, not to. The Stoics called it the governing faculty, the part of you that watches the chaos, names it clearly, and decides, not what will happen, but who you will be while it happens. That faculty is not a gift. It is trained. It is built in the hours before the world claims you. What you are about to receive is a framework, forged in the hardest moments of human history, for governing your own mind before anything else gets the chance to govern it for you. 11 chapters. 1 arc. 1 destination. The version of you that the storm cannot reach. The war that starts before you open your eyes. There is a negotiation happening inside you right now that you did not agree to and were never told about. It begins in the layer of consciousness that exists before language, before logic, before the first coherent thought of the morning has formed. And by the time you are aware enough to participate in it, it has often already been decided, not in your favor. The mind, in the moments between deep sleep and full waking, is in a state of extraordinary vulnerability, open to fear, open to dread, open to yesterday's unresolved tensions and tomorrow's unnamed anxieties, but also, and this is what the Stoics understood with a precision that still unsettles modern psychology, open to deliberate shaping. Marcus Aurelius did not wake up as an emperor. He woke up as a man, a tired man, carrying the weight of an empire in the middle of a plague, surrounded by advisors he could not fully trust, fighting wars on borders that never stopped bleeding. And yet in the Meditations Book 2, he wrote something that should stop you completely. Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. He did not begin with gratitude for the sunrise. He began by naming with surgical honesty exactly what the day was going to throw at him, because a mind that has already named its adversaries cannot be ambushed by them. Clarity, however brutal, is always more useful than comfort. Think about the last morning you woke up and immediately reached for your phone. What happened to the quality of your attention for the rest of that hour? You absorbed information you did not choose at the moment when your mind was most receptive. You handed the governance of your opening moments to an algorithm built not to serve your growth, but to capture your attention. The war begins before your eyes open. The only question that matters is whether you are present for it, or whether you sleep through the most important battle of the day while technically being awake. You were never taught to begin, only to react. There is a question that no school ever asked you. No teacher wrote it on a board. No curriculum in any country in any era of modern education has ever made it a graduation requirement, and yet it is arguably the most consequential question a human being can learn to answer. The question is this: how do you begin? Here is what actually happened to you. From the moment you entered a structured environment, school, organized sport, family routine, you were taught to respond. The bell rings and you sit. The teacher speaks and you listen. You were rewarded for correct responses and penalized for incorrect ones. You were shaped, over thousands of repetitions, into a creature of reaction. And nobody told you this was happening because for the purposes of institutional efficiency, it was not a limitation. It was the goal. The problem is that the institutions eventually end, and suddenly you are standing in the morning of your own life, with no bell, no teacher, no external schedule, and in that vacuum, you do what you were trained to do. You wait. You look for the signal. You reach for the phone because the phone provides what the institution used to provide, a stream of external cues that tell you what to attend to, what to feel, what is urgent. You are not reaching for your phone because you are undisciplined. You are reaching for it because you were never given an alternative architecture. Epictetus knew this dynamic intimately. As a slave, his entire existence was structured around responding to the will of another. Every moment was dictated externally, and yet he identified with absolute clarity that there was one domain that had never been touched: the inner citadel, the capacity to choose, in any circumstance, the quality and orientation of one's own judgment. That capacity does not activate automatically. It is activated by practice, by the deliberate daily act of returning to yourself before the world gets there first. The morning is where that practice either takes root or gets crowded out by noise that was never yours to begin with. The Stoic secret, hidden in the darkest hour of history. There are moments in human history that function as laboratories. Environments so extreme, so stripped of comfort and illusion, that everything non-essential is burned away, and only what is fundamentally true about human nature remains. Viktor Frankl was not a Stoic by training. He was a psychiatrist who, between 1942 and 1945, was imprisoned in 4 Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He lost his wife. He lost his manuscript. He was reduced by deliberate institutional violence to the absolute minimum of human existence, and in that minimum, he found something. In his own words, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That sentence did not come from a comfortable afternoon. It came from Auschwitz, and it arrived at the same conclusion that Epictetus had reached 18 centuries earlier, from his own experience of enforced powerlessness. Not because the two men had read each other, but because the truth they were pointing at is not cultural or historical or conditional, it is structural. It is built into the nature of consciousness itself. What Frankl observed in the camps was a pattern. The prisoners who endured longest, spiritually, psychologically, in the integrity of their inner world, were not necessarily the strongest or youngest. They were the ones who maintained, under conditions designed to eliminate it, some form of inner orientation, some thread of meaning, some practice, however small, of returning to themselves before the day claimed them entirely. These were not acts of denial. They were acts of sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations in military camps during plague, under continuous pressure. He wrote them as a daily practice of reorientation, reminding himself every morning of the principles by which he had chosen to live, because without that daily reminder, the weight of the external world would gradually reshape him into something he had not chosen to become. What connects Frankl and Aurelius is not their suffering. It is their method. Both understood that the only sustainable position, the only one that held across every category of adversity, was the one that began inside. That established, before the day loaded its demands, a center of gravity that the demands would have to contend with rather than simply displace. The question this leaves you with is immediate and personal. Where have you located your strength? And if the answer is in your circumstances, in your relationships, your professional standing, your financial security, then you already know what happens when those things change. Mapping the inner citadel. What is actually within your control? There is a line. It exists inside every human life with the same precision that a property boundary exists between two pieces of land. On one side lives everything that is genuinely, irrevocably yours. On the other side lives everything that is not. And the most consequential skill a human being can develop is the ability to know, in any given moment, exactly where that line falls. Epictetus opened the Enchiridion, his handbook for living, with it. The very first sentence: some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in one word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. That is the map. 2 territories, 1 line. But the line is not where most people think it is. Most people act as though their reputation is within their control, because they are careful about how they present themselves. They act as though outcomes are within their control because they work hard. They act as though other people's responses are within their control because they are skilled at influence. And when those things do not comply with the effort invested, the result is not just disappointment. It is a specific suffering with no legitimate object, because it was built on a misreading of the map. Seneca identified this misreading as the root of almost all human anxiety. We suffer not primarily because bad things happen, but because we have claimed ownership of things that were never ours to own. The anxiety is the gap between what we have claimed and what we actually hold. What is on your side of the line? Be precise. Your judgment, your effort, your values, your response to what happens, your attention, where you direct the searchlight of your consciousness. These are yours, completely, not conditionally, not when circumstances are favorable. Always, under every condition. In the concentration camp, in the plague, in the exile, they remain yours. When you internalize this, not as intellectual proposition but as lived orientation, the morning stops being a source of dread and becomes a place of genuine authority. You now have a response to the anxious mind that is not denial and not suppression. You have a map. Look at each item on the mind's anxious list and ask honestly, is this on my side of the line? If it is, address it with full effort. If it is not, release it, not because you don't care, but because holding it costs you the energy you need for what actually is yours. The architecture of the deliberate morning. Everything up to this point has been preparation. The philosophy, the history, the map, all of it has been building toward a single practical question, not a list of habits, not a 5-step morning routine you can screenshot and forget, but an actual architecture, a framework that holds its shape under the weight of real life, on the mornings when you are tired, grieving, overwhelmed. Here is the truth about morning routines that the lifestyle industry will not tell you. Most of them fail not because the practices are wrong, but because the foundation is wrong. They are built on motivation, and motivation is a weather system. It works beautifully when life is cooperating, and it collapses completely on exactly the mornings when you need it most. The Stoic morning is not built on motivation. It is built on commitment to a practice that you have decided, in advance, reflects the kind of person you have chosen to be. Not because you feel like it, because you decided, and the decision, made once with clarity and renewed daily, is more stable than any feeling that might accompany it. The architecture has 3 chambers. The first chamber, the honest inventory. Before you plan the day, before you set intentions, you sit with what is actually true. The honest inventory asks 3 questions. What is actually present this morning? Not what should be present, but what is genuinely here? Name it. The unnamed thing has power over you precisely because it operates below the threshold of language. The moment you name it, you have begun to govern it. Second, what will today likely ask of me that will challenge my chosen way of being? This is not pessimism. It is the specific realism the Stoics called negative visualization, the deliberate, brief anticipation of difficulty as a preparation tool. The general who has studied the terrain is not afraid of the terrain. They are ready for it. Third, of everything in this inventory, what is genuinely on my side of the line? The second chamber, the chosen orientation. Having established what is true and what is yours, you make a decision, not about what you will produce, but about how you will be. What quality are you bringing to this day? Not to every future day, to this one, today. Some days demand patience. Some days demand courage, the willingness to say the true thing in a room where the false thing is more comfortable. Some days demand equanimity, the capacity to remain level across whatever arrives, neither inflated by the good nor collapsed by the difficult. Naming the quality does not guarantee you will embody it, but it creates a reference point, a lighthouse, not a chain, that you can return to throughout the day when you feel yourself drifting. The third chamber, the single point of contact. Having completed the honest inventory and established the chosen orientation, you now identify the one thing, not the list, not the priorities ranked 1 through 7, but the single point of contact between your intention and the day, that, if done with full attention and full effort, will make the day genuinely yours. Not the most urgent thing, not the thing screaming loudest for attention, the thing most aligned with the person you are in the process of becoming. This is the anchor. Everything else can be reactive, adaptive to whatever the day produces. But this one thing is sovereign. It belongs to the inner citadel. It is the daily proof, renewed every 24 hours, that you are not simply being carried by the current of events, but that you are, in some real and non-trivial sense, navigating. The sequence cannot be compromised. Inventory before orientation, orientation before action, clarity before commitment. Reverse it and you have not a morning practice but a performance. The foundation beneath the practice, Amor Fati, and the morning you did not choose. Now think about the hardest kind of morning, not the minor inconveniences. The morning after the diagnosis, the morning after the relationship ended, the morning when grief is sitting on your chest before you have fully remembered why, and then you remember why, and the weight doubles. These are not edge cases. These are the mornings the practice is actually for. The foundation that holds on those mornings is not a technique. It is a relationship, a specific, cultivated, philosophically grounded relationship with reality, as it actually is, not as you wish it were, as it is. Right now, this morning, with everything it contains. Marcus Aurelius called it Amor Fati, love of fate. Not acceptance, which is resignation, not endurance, which is gritted teeth survival. Love. The genuine orientation of the will toward what is, simply because it is real, because it is the actual material of your life, because the alternative, the constant low-grade war against what is the most reliably effective method ever devised for ensuring that you never fully inhabit your own existence. This is the hardest thing in this entire video. Because Amor Fati asks you not to do something, but to be something. It asks you to locate, inside the fact of your life as it actually is, including its losses, its limitations, its unfairnesses, a genuine willingness to be here. Nietzsche described Amor Fati as the highest formula for human greatness. That one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. Here is what Amor Fati is not. It is not toxic positivity. It is not the instruction to feel good about bad things. Frankl did not love Auschwitz. Aurelius did not love the plague or the grief of watching people he cared for die. What Amor Fati actually points at is more precise and more difficult than that. It is the refusal to allow what is real to be made worse by the additional layer of resistance to its reality. Suffering, minus the suffering generated by fighting the fact that the suffering is present. What remains is still hard, but it has not been doubled by the mind's war against it. In practical terms, on a hard morning, Amor Fati sounds like this. This is what is here. This weight, this grief, this uncertainty. It is not an obstacle to my life. It is my life, right now. And I am going to live it, not around it, not despite it, but through it with whatever quality of attention I can genuinely bring to this specific morning. Marcus wrote in Book 4, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The hard morning is not a detour from the practice. It is the terrain on which the practice becomes real rather than theoretical. It is where the philosophy stops being something you have read and becomes something you are living. The threshold, How to begin tomorrow morning with the life you actually have. Everything before this chapter has been architecture. This chapter is the door. And the door is not where most people expect to find it. It is not after you have resolved the competing demands on your time, reorganized your schedule, and created ideal conditions. It opens tomorrow morning. And the only requirement for walking through it is the decision to do so. The real enemy of beginning is not laziness. It is the gap between understanding and embodiment. You can understand everything in this video completely and still wake up tomorrow and reach for the phone. Not because you forgot. Because understanding and embodiment are two entirely different things, and the distance between them is crossed not by more understanding, but by repetition. By the daily act of doing the thing before you feel like doing the thing, until the doing of the thing becomes the thing you are. The night before. The deliberate morning begins the night before, with a single act that takes less than 3 minutes. Before you sleep, you answer one question in writing. What is the one quality I am bringing to tomorrow? Not a task, not a goal, a quality. Patience, honesty, courage, presence. Write it down. Leave it where you will see it before you see anything else tomorrow morning. Before the phone, before the news, before anyone else's agenda. This is your first act of sovereignty over the morning, performed the night before, which means it is already done before the morning has had any opportunity to disorient you. The first 5 minutes, the alarm goes off. There is a window, brief, precious, consistently underestimated, between the moment of waking and the moment the world begins its claim on your attention. Most people spend that window looking at a screen. Not because they are weak, but because the phone is designed at a level of psychological precision that rivals any pharmaceutical intervention to capture exactly that window. The Stoic morning begins differently, with a pause. 30 seconds is sufficient. In that pause, you return to the word you wrote the night before. You read it, not as an affirmation to be recited, but as a compass point to be found. Then you enter the first chamber, the honest inventory, the chosen orientation, the single point of contact. The whole sequence can be completed in 5 minutes. On mornings when you have more time, go deeper. On mornings when you have less, compress it. But do not skip the sequence. The sequence is the practice, the resistance protocol. There will be mornings when you do not want to do any of this, when the pillow is more compelling than any philosophy, when the argument for beginning is intellectually available but emotionally inert. This is not a malfunction. This is the practice testing its own foundations. The correct response is to do the minimum viable version, not to skip it, not to negotiate with yourself about whether today's circumstances justify an exception. On the hardest mornings, the minimum viable practice is this. Find the word you wrote the night before. Read it. Say aloud or internally one sentence that locates you in the present. I am here. This is what is. I choose how I meet it. That is the entire practice on the mornings when more is not possible, and that minimum, maintained consistently, is worth infinitely more than the perfect practice that only happens when conditions cooperate. The enemy within. Identifying the patterns that sabotage the morning. There is a version of you that does not want to change. This is not a moral failing. It is biology. The human nervous system is not optimized for growth. It is optimized for survival, which means it is optimized for the familiar. And the brain treats the familiar as safe and the unfamiliar as threat, including the unfamiliar version of yourself that the morning practice is building. Without understanding this, every moment of resistance will be interpreted as personal failure. And that interpretation is not just wrong. It is the specific mechanism by which the resistance wins. The moment you decide the resistance is about your inadequacy, rather than about a predictable neurological response to genuine change, you have turned a navigable obstacle into an identity conclusion. Name the principle first. The resistance is not yours. It belongs to the system. It has no opinion about your flourishing. Its only job is to make the unfamiliar feel dangerous and the familiar feel safe. Your job every morning is to notice the mechanism without being governed by it. Pattern 1. The negotiating mind. It begins the moment the alarm sounds and takes the form of a thought that sounds reasonable. Not today. I didn't sleep well. I'll do a longer practice tomorrow. The negotiating mind is sophisticated. It never argues against the practice in principle. It argues against this specific instance on these specific grounds with logic that feels entirely persuasive from inside your own mind. The counter is not to argue back. Argumentation with the negotiating mind is a trap. It has the home advantage. The counter is recognition. The moment you notice the negotiation beginning, you simply name it. That is the negotiating mind doing its job. Then you do the minimum viable practice, just enough to maintain the thread. Pattern 2, the perfectionism trap. It sounds like this: I only have 10 minutes, which isn't enough to do it properly, so I'll skip it and do it right tomorrow. Perfectionism is resistance in formal dress. It uses the language of quality and integrity to justify the avoidance of any practice that cannot be performed at its ideal standard. The Stoic response: do what the moment allows. 12 minutes of genuine practice maintained across 365 days produces a transformation that the perfect 60-minute practice, performed twice and then abandoned, will never approach. Pattern 3. The identity ceiling. This one operates continuously, below the level of daily decisions, at the level of self-concept. I am not a morning person. I have never been able to maintain habits consistently. These beliefs feel like honest empirical observations. They are not. They are conclusions drawn from past behavior and applied to future possibility, as though the future were required to replicate the past. The counter is not positive self-talk. Telling yourself you are a morning person when your entire history suggests otherwise creates a conflict that the evidence always wins. The counter is behavioral. You act once in a way inconsistent with the ceiling. You do the 30 seconds tomorrow morning. Then again, the next day. Not because you have convinced yourself you are a different person, but because you are generating evidence, small and accumulating, that is slowly revising the identity conclusion from the bottom up. Pattern 4. The comparison collapse. You encounter someone else's morning practice, the person who wakes at 4:30, meditates for 45 minutes, journals 3 pages, exercises for an hour, and your 12-minute minimum viable practice suddenly feels like a pale imitation of the real thing. The collapse is based on a category error. Their practice is not your practice. What counts is not the absolute quality of your practice measured against some external standard. It is the relative quality measured against your own genuine capacity in this specific moment. A person who maintains 10 deliberate minutes daily in the context of a genuinely complex life is doing something more philosophically significant than someone performing an elaborate 2-hour ritual in optimal conditions with no competing pressures. The practice is not a performance. It was never meant to be witnessed. It was meant to be lived. The midday return, how to recover the morning when the day has taken it. The morning practice holds until it doesn't. This is not pessimism. It is the honest acknowledgement of a reality that every person who has attempted any form of self-governance has encountered, usually before 10 o'clock. You complete the practice. You orient yourself. You walk through the door with something that resembles intention. And then the day happens. A message arrives that carries a charge, anxiety, irritation, urgency, that instantly reorganizes your inner state around its own agenda. A conversation goes sideways. A piece of news arrives that makes the quality you chose in the morning feel distant and theoretical. By 9:45, the orientation you established at 7 is not a compass point you are navigating toward. It is a memory of 1. This is not a failure of the practice. This is the practice encountering its actual conditions. The question it raises, how do you return to yourself when the day has taken you somewhere else, is, in many ways, more important than the question of how you begin. The quality of the practitioner is not measured by how rarely they get disrupted. It is measured by how quickly and completely they find their way back. What happens? When the day takes you, getting taken does not feel like losing control. It feels like responding appropriately to what the situation requires. The message that provoked your anxiety felt genuinely alarming. The conversation that triggered your defensiveness contained something actually unfair. The response felt like the correct and proportionate reaction to real circumstances. This is precisely where the Stoic framework diverges from ordinary experience, not in denying that the circumstances were real, but in distinguishing sharply between the event and the interpretation of the event, between what happened and what the mind did with what happened, between the stimulus and the story the nervous system constructed around it in the fraction of a second before conscious thought was available. Marcus Aurelius returns to this distinction more than any other in the Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength he points at is the gap, the tiny, trainable, expandable space between what arrives and what you do with it. In that gap lives everything. The entire practice is in service of widening that gap by a fraction, enough that a choice becomes possible where previously only a reaction existed. The 3-breath reset. The simplest and most immediately deployable return practice requires nothing external. 3 deliberate breaths, not the shallow automatic breathing of the reactive state, but 3 conscious complete cycles, during which the single word from the morning is recalled. This is not breathing as relaxation, it is breathing as interruption. The breath creates a brief physiological shift that opens, even fractionally, the gap that the reactive state had closed. And into that opening, the word from the morning is placed, not as a command, as a compass point. 3 breaths is not a dramatic practice, but it does one thing consistently. It returns you to the position of the observer, the part of you that can see the reactive state rather than simply being it. And from that position, however briefly maintained, a choice becomes available. The midday pause. Beyond the immediate reset, there is a slightly more structured midday practice, a mini version of the morning's honest inventory, conducted at the day's natural inflection point. 3 questions answered honestly in no more than 3 minutes. Where am I right now in relation to the quality I chose this morning? What took me? And, the question that returns agency, what is the one adjustment I can make in the next hour that brings me back into alignment? One adjustment. Not a comprehensive course correction, specific, small, immediately actionable. The meeting this afternoon that will likely provoke your impatience. Can you set the intention to listen twice as long as you speak? The email you have been drafting in a reactive state. Can you wait 20 minutes before sending it? One adjustment, made consistently across weeks and months, produces a compound effect disproportionate to its apparent smallness. There are days when the return reveals not a drift but a complete displacement, when the quality chosen in the morning is so thoroughly absent that the gap between intention and reality feels like an indictment. The response to those days is Amor Fati applied to the afternoon. This is what is here. The displacement is real, and I am going to return, not to where I intended to be this morning, but to where I am capable of being right now, from this position, with what is genuinely available. A partial return, a single moment of choosing the quality in the middle of a day that has been almost entirely reactive, is not a consolation prize. It is a genuine act of self-governance, and in fact a more significant one than the same choice made on an easy morning from a stable position. The difficulty of the conditions is not subtracted from the value of the choice. It is added to it. The evening examination, closing the day with honesty and without self-punishment. The day is ending. Whatever it contained, the clarity and the confusion, the moments of genuine alignment and the moments of complete drift, it is now fixed. It cannot be revised. It is entirely outside the jurisdiction of the dichotomy of control. Most people end the day one of 2 ways. The first is avoidance, the scroll, the screen, the passive consumption of entertainment that asks nothing and offers the temporary relief of not having to think about what the day produced. The second is rumination, the involuntary recursive replay of what went wrong, cycling through the evidence of the day's failures without ever reaching a verdict that allows rest. Both are understandable, and both fail to extract from the day what the day was capable of offering. The Stoic evening practice is the alternative. Not avoidance and not rumination, Examination. Deliberate, structured, honest, and bounded. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It produces something actionable. And then it is complete. Seneca described the practice in his essay on anger with a specificity that makes clear it was not theoretical for him. Every evening he reviewed the day in 3 passes. Where did I fail? Where did I succeed? Where could I have done better? Not as self-flagellation, he is explicit about this, but as the honest assessment of a person genuinely committed to their own development. Development without feedback is not development. It is repetition. The first movement, honest accounting. A honest sweep of the day, not minute by minute, but the moments that mattered. The moments when the quality you chose was tested. For each, one question. Was there a moment in this sequence where a choice was available and I either took it or missed it? If you took it well, name it, not for self-congratulation but for calibration. You need to know what holding the quality looks like in actual conditions so you can reproduce it. If you missed it, name that too. Not for self-punishment, but for the same reason. You need to know where the practice is thin, so you know where to direct tomorrow's attention. The second movement, the release. After the honest accounting is complete, you release it, deliberately, consciously, as an act of will. The day is over. What it contained is now on the wrong side of the dichotomy of control, beyond the reach of any action you can take tonight. The honest accounting has extracted from it everything useful. What remains is residue, and the decision to carry residue into sleep, to allow the unresolved charge of the day's failures to continue processing through the night, is not a form of responsibility. It is a form of punishment. And punishment serves no developmental function. It is simply suffering layered on top of failure. The release can be as simple as a single written line. This day is complete. What it contained has been examined. What was useful has been kept. The rest is finished. The form is less important than the function. The function is the genuine, willed relinquishment of what cannot be changed. The third movement, the forward intention. The third movement returns us to the night before practice, but now grounded in the specific feedback of today's honest accounting. You know where the quality thinned today. You know which situations tested it most. From that knowledge, you set one forward intention, not a goal, a single specific quality for tomorrow. You write it down, one word or one sentence. You place it where you will find it before anything else tomorrow morning. And then the examination is complete. The day is genuinely closed, not avoided, not ruminated into exhaustion, examined, released, and forward-oriented. Seneca wrote, "Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est." Everything is alien to us. Time alone is ours. The evening examination is the practice of honoring that truth, of treating the hours that have just passed not as something that happened to you, but as yours, as the material of your actual life, deserving your honest attention before it becomes permanently past. The architecture of a life, what the morning practice is actually building. We began with a single question, not the question of how to optimize your morning, not the question of which habits produce the highest performance or which rituals the most successful people share. Those questions are real, and they are not without value. But they are not the question this video has been attempting to answer. The question is older than productivity culture, older than self-help, older than the entire apparatus of modern optimization. It is the question Marcus Aurelius was asking in the Meditations, that Epictetus was asking in the Discourses, that Seneca was asking in his final letters when he knew he was dying, and had stopped pretending that anything other than the essential deserved his remaining attention. The question is this: how does a person live well, in full knowledge that everything external is contingent, that circumstances cannot be controlled, that the world will produce exactly as much disruption and difficulty as it will regardless of how well prepared you are, and still maintain something that is genuinely theirs? Something that compounds rather than depreciates, deepens rather than erodes, becomes more itself the more it is tested? The morning practice is not the answer to that question. It is the daily rehearsal of it, what you have actually been building. Across the 10 chapters that preceded this one, a structure has been assembled, not a routine, not a protocol, a structure, in the architectural sense, a system of load-bearing relationships that distributes the weight of what life produces across a framework capable of holding it. The foundation is the dichotomy of control. The recognition, internalized not as philosophy but as daily operational reality, that the domain of genuine agency is smaller than the ego desires and larger than despair suggests. The first chamber is honest inventory, the daily, unglamorous practice of seeing clearly what is actually present. The second chamber is chosen orientation, the active selection of a quality, rather than the passive reception of whatever mood the morning deposits. This is the practical operationalization of what the Stoics meant by virtue, not in the moralistic sense but in the original sense. Arete, excellence, the full expression of the capacity that is distinctly human. The third chamber is single point of contact, because a quality without expression is not a quality. It is an aspiration. On top of this, the architecture extends through the day, the resistance patterns, the midday return, the evening examination, each element load-bearing, each supporting and supported by the others, the longer arc. At the scale of a year, the daily practice produces something invisible from inside any individual day, a progressive refinement of the honest inventory, the chosen orientation, the single point of contact. The word you choose in January will not be the same word you would choose in December, because the practice itself will have taught you things about your actual patterns that January's version of you did not know. At the scale of several years, something more fundamental shifts. The practice stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The gap between stimulus and response, which required deliberate, effortful maintenance in the early months, begins to hold on its own. The morning orientation becomes less a correction applied to the default and more the default itself. This is not enlightenment. It is something more modest and more real, the gradual development of a person whose inner life is less at the mercy of outer circumstances than it used to be. Not invulnerable, not unmoved, not beyond the reach of loss or disappointment, but less reactive, more capable of the gap, more often able to choose the quality rather than produce the reaction, more genuinely, durably, non-performatively themselves. The question of why. The morning practice matters because consciousness is the only thing you will ever have that is genuinely, irreducibly yours. Everything else, the relationships, the achievements, the reputation, the accumulated possessions and positions, all of it is borrowed. All of it exists in the external world where the dichotomy of control places it. Consciousness is different. The quality of your inner life, the degree to which you are genuinely present to your own experience, genuinely oriented toward your own values, genuinely capable of choosing rather than simply reacting, is the one thing that cannot be taken, that does not depreciate, that does not depend on external conditions for its integrity. The morning practice is the daily act of showing up to tend that one thing, of treating your own consciousness not as a tool for producing outputs, not as an asset to be optimized, but as the primary site of a life genuinely lived, as the place where everything that matters actually happens. The last thing Epictetus said. At the end of the discourses, after several hundred pages of argument and instruction and philosophical precision, Epictetus says something with the quality of everything essential compressed into a few words. He says, "You have been given a small part to play in a great drama. Play it well. That is all that is required. Not that you rewrite the drama. Not that you determine the length of your part or what the other actors will do. Simply that you play the part that has been given to you, with full commitment, with genuine presence, with the quality available to you in the role you actually have, rather than the role you wished you had been cast in. The morning practice is how you show up to that role each day, not in the grand sense. In the ordinary, daily, unglamorous sense, you wake up, you pause, you find the compass point, You take honest inventory of what is actually present. You choose a quality. You identify one action through which to express it. And then you walk into the day, not as a person who has solved the problem of being human, but as a person who has decided one more time to meet it consciously. That decision, repeated across enough mornings, through enough disruptions and returns and examinations and renewals, that is the architecture. That is what is being built. Not a better morning routine, not a more productive day, not an optimized life in the thin, modern sense of that word. A life that is, in the oldest and most serious and most demanding sense of the word, yours. The alarm will go off tomorrow morning. The window will open. The choice will be available. Everything in this video has been in preparation for that moment. What you do with it is, as it has always been, entirely up to you.